So let's talk about interval notation. Interval notation is a way to summarize the answer to an inequality question in as abbreviated of a fashion as possible to give the absolute minimum amount of information in the most concise and direct manner possible. So here are three inequality answers that are all pretty closely related to each other. In fact, in normal English, you would probably describe all three of these with pretty much the same words. You would say that x is between -3 and 7. Now, the English language is kind of limited with handling what happens at endpoints. You have to get really wordy to try to say including the -3 and including the 7, or not including the -3 but including the 7. And that isn't really English's fault. There's not like there's another language that does that better. But mathematically, these can be very different things. Less than or equal to is different from regular less than. And they have to be demonstrated, drawn, and explained differently as well. So the first type of description that I think most people are fairly comfortable with is graphs. Actually drawing a number line and highlighting which section of numbers you're talking about. So for the left-hand one, where you include the endpoints -3 and 7, and then if you don't include the endpoints, you have to use a different type of dot at the end, sort of an open circle that shows it's not included. And of course, like the one on the right, you can have half and half. There can be one end where it's included and one end where it's not included. So for all three of these, there is a portion of the interval notation that's the same. Interval notation is always about left end, right end. And all of these have a left end at -3 and a right end at 7. So that can't be the same for all of them. There has to be a difference. And the difference is the symbols you use to enclose the ends. So with this left-hand one, where you're including the -3 and you're including the 7, the symbol to say you're including the endpoints is to use a square parenthesis, something that's technically called a bracket. If you're not including the endpoints, you use a rounded regular parentheses. And of course, if it's mixed, you would use one of one kind and one of the other kind. So whichever end you put a square bracket on, you're saying include this number as part of the solution. And if you don't want to include that number as the part of the solution, then you got to use the rounded parentheses instead. This gets a little trickier, not much, but a little trickier, if you're talking about problems that don't have an end on one end or the other. Like this first one here, where the x's are bigger than -3, you don't include -3, open circle there, unincluded, and then everything bigger than -3 is included. It just goes and goes and goes and goes. So if you want to describe using the basic idea of interval notation, which is left end, right end, the left end of this interval is at -3, and the right end, well, it goes on forever, so the right end is at, I guess we would say, infinity. Round parentheses, because you're not including the -3. Similar idea if it's the left end that doesn't exist. Here there's a right end at 7. 7 is definitely an answer of this thing. But to the right, or to the left, it goes to the left forever. And to distinguish that from the other situation, we call that negative infinity. That's infinite in the negative direction, negative infinity. And watch out. Yes, it's square brackets, but do not put square brackets on both ends. If you put a square bracket at this end, what you're saying is, you're saying that you can plug in this number and it'll work. And that's wrong a couple of different ways. Probably the easiest one to understand is, that's not a number. That's actually a symbol that indicates it goes forever in that direction. It's not like somewhere over here at the left there's a point, and that point is at negative infinity and it stops there. That's not what we're trying to say. That's not what's going on here. So don't use that symbol at the end for infinity ever. Anytime you're using infinity, either regular infinity or negative infinity, always use a round parentheses on that end. Yeah, square parentheses on the 7, but never square parentheses on any kind of infinity. Then there are two other symbols you need to know about for interval notation. They have to do with the situations like this, sort of more intervals and less intervals. If you've got more than one interval, like this inequality here, where we're supposed to do the stuff between -3 and 7, including 7, and also the stuff bigger than or equal to 15, when you graph that out in a picture, you see visually that that's two separate intervals. There's an interval on the left that would be written up this way, and there's an interval on the right that would be written up this way. But this is not two different answers to two different questions. This is one answer to maybe a fairly complicated question. So to indicate that this is one connected answer where it's all one thing, you use this little U-shaped symbol. This comes from the set theory union symbol. So it's not quite a letter U. You don't put a little extra little down line over there. That's wrong. It's just a little, kind of a parabola almost, a little more U-shaped than that. But that's the symbol to connect multiple intervals together all into a single answer. And then the last case is that there is interval notation when your answer consists of just a single isolated point, where it's technically not even really an interval. There isn't a spread of numbers that are all included. There's just one isolated little number all by its little lonesome sitting there alone. And the symbol for that is to use the other type of parentheses that we haven't used yet. So we use round parentheses and square parentheses and curly parentheses. These ones are technically called braces. All types of parentheses get used in interval notation at one point or another.